Hello, welcome back to our channel. My name is Darren, and I am one half of this channel, along with Paige. If you've not yet watched Paige's last episode on book hauls and the morality of them, please go do that. I think it's a really important conversation. But my conversation today is actually going back to the series that I've been doing, which is The Books That Built Me. I have been talking about the Tamora Pierce books. I started with Alana's story, and then I went to Dane's story. This week I was going to do Kel's story, but then Paige told me that for one of her book clubs, they are reading Persuasion by Jane Austen, which just so happens to be my absolute favorite Jane Austen story. So I thought that I would do kind of a Jane Austen episode, but mostly I'm just focusing on Persuasion because I want to be a part of the conversation, even though I'm not in her book club and I do not live in her town and I don't know anybody else in the book club. I am just inserting myself. Anyways, so I have a lot of versions of Persuasion because I loan it out to people, because when people tell me they want to try Jane Austen, they often reference Pride and Prejudice because they loved the 2005 version, the movie with Keira Knightley. And I gotta be honest, that movie is beautiful. It is stunning. The acting is great. The casting is amazing. My biggest issue with it is that they cut out a lot of the story for all those sweeping, beautiful cinematic shots. I'm not mad about it though, because it's beautiful. And that score, get out of here. I defy anybody to not be in love with that score. Anyways, back to the point. People often say that they want to start with Pride and Prejudice. I think it's like a real big cultural touchstone for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and I understand why. However, let me tell you why that's wrong, and you should start with Persuasion. To do that, we do have to do a little bit of backstory on Jane Austen. So Jane Austen was a prolific and brilliant writer. I say prolific because, you have to imagine she was writing everything by hand. She was doing it kind of in secret. It's a whole big thing. Maybe I'll do an entire episode just on Jane Austen's life to give people more perspective. But for now, we're really going to focus on Persuasion, like I said. But we're going to do a little bit of background on Jane Austen in general. So Jane Austen died when she was 41 in 1817 in July. In December, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion were published as a post-death double feature, kind of. And before that, she had written Sense and Sensibility, which came out in 1811, Pride and Prejudice, which came out in 1813, Mansfield Park, which came out in 1814, and Emma, which came out in 1815. You may notice I'm looking this way. I have another screen set up right here, and I have all my notes, because I'm going to be super honest, I'm a little bit sick. You might be able to hear it in my voice. And it's really important to give you accurate information and not just flex about I'm so smart, I know when dates are. No, I want to give you accurate information. So it's more important for me to look off camera and give you what is real than be I'm so smart. So, also, please admire this very beautiful, I found it at an estate sale, whatever, for $10. I think it's beautiful. It's one of my favorites, but it's unwieldy because it's all of her works in one. I have all of her works also as the Penguin Classic paperbacks, and I also thrift them whenever I find a beautiful copy because it's one of the very few, it's I just want more Jane Austen in my life and I want the most beautiful versions I can get, but I am poor and thrifty. So here we are. Okay, back into it. So they were published after her death and they weren't done. And we know this for a couple of reasons. So let me just tell you the length of each book. So Pride and Prejudice was 312 pages. Mansfield Park is 364. Sense and Sensibility is 368. Emma is 364. Northanger Abbey comes in at 264, and Persuasion. Oh my God. Persuasion comes in at 286. So she also had shorter works that were short stories that she sent her friends via letters. All of those combined come into about 236. She was working on a book called Sanditon, tentatively called Sanditon, when she died. Back to the point. So she wrote Persuasion from August 1815 to August 1816. She died about a year later. And we know that how she wrote is that she would write all of the pages. She was very secretive about it. And then she would let her family read it. Her sister Cassandra would read it as she was writing. But then she would like kind of open it up when she had like the general bones of everything. And once she got feedback from her family and friends that she trusted, she would then kind of expand the world about 100 more pages. So we know that Persuasion is not quite done, and we can see that in a couple of scenes. By the way, this is going to have spoilers in it. The book is over 200 years old. If you're mad about spoilers, don't tell me, because the book is 200 years old. Okay. We see that in a couple of scenes, like when Louisa falls and she hits her head and she's suddenly unconscious. This was very much like, you could tell this was like a device to move the plot along. It wasn't fully thought out yet. There needed to be a little more to it. There are a couple of scenes between like Anne and Mary and so on and so forth. So I think that it's really important to note that when we talk about Persuasion, because a lot of people, when they read Persuasion, it becomes their favorite Jane Austen novel, and it also becomes the novel that people say they wish they had more of. And I think that's because it is undone. It is not finished, and that's okay. So that's number one. Number two is that there are a lot of things in Persuasion that felt so deeply personal to Jane Austen's life, like turning someone down and then becoming worried about being in her old age and not having somebody, being obsessed in her youth with making a perfect match, and then later realizing that the perfect match was somebody that she loved. There are a lot of reasons that Jane Austen is revolutionary. That is one of the big ones. During that time, like, we all know the famous scene in Pride and Prejudice, the first time that Lizzie Bennet declines Mr. Darcy. That's a big deal. If her family found out that she did that, it would have been catastrophic. Like, she could have literally saved every single one of them from poverty by doing that. And poverty in those times was not like, I can't get the new iPhone. I know that a lot of us know this, but like, just to put it in perspective, poverty in that time was like what we see in Sense and Sensibility, where you have to rely on a family member that maybe you do not know, maybe you do not like. You have to hope that they are trustworthy and gentlemanly and that they will take care of you. We see it also in Mansfield Park. Poverty is not glamorous. It's not glamorous in any time. It is not glamorous now. It was not glamorous then. And living in poverty, especially as a woman who could not find work, as a woman of like middling nobility, like gentry, who would not be able to like go and be a washerwoman. She would have to try and find a place as a governess, but she wouldn't have official schooling. There were a lot of moving parts that would have made that really, really scary. So we kind of see the flip of that in Persuasion. You know, Anne Elliot is in love with Captain Wentworth. She's in love with him. And then he proposes, she says yes. And her family says, hold on a second. You outrank him by quite a lot. This is not a good match. This will pull us down in society. She breaks off the engagement. She breaks his heart. He goes away. He becomes Captain Wentworth. At that time, he was just like a sailor. He becomes Captain Wentworth. He comes back. Her family is now impoverished because her dad and her older sister spend like crazy. They do not know the meaning of a budget. So they're renting out their estate to Captain Wentworth's sister and her husband, so his brother-in-law. And then Anne and her family are like elsewhere. They're in Bath, which is a little bit cheaper than staying on their estate. They're visiting their friends. They're visiting her middle sister, Mary. All these different things. Very, very important, right? So we see in this novel a really clear picture of regret. Anne regrets what she did. She regrets that she left that relationship at the behest of her family, and specifically of her mom's best friend. Her mom is dead. Her mom's best friend, who advised her strongly not to get into this relationship, because everybody thought that Anne deserved more, that she deserved a better ranking husband. They were not necessarily thinking like, is this man kind? Will this man be good to her? They were thinking like, what can this man do for her status? Which is not crazy. The thing is that Anne does not necessarily villainize anyone in her life for that. She only talks about her own personal regret. I think that that's a really, really telling and interesting way of telling the story. She's not mad at her mom's best friend. She is not mad at her dad. She is not mad at her sisters. She's mad at herself for allowing their judgment to cloud what she wanted and to change. Fettuccine. I cannot with this cat. She's being very needy. Anyways. So I think that that's really important, and I think it's important to acknowledge that when you're talking about Persuasion. I promise I'm going to get to the point about how this is a book that built me, but as you can see, I feel very strongly about this book, so maybe you're already kind of getting maybe you're already scooping what I'm pooping, you know? Anyways, so as Anne goes to visit her sister, she finds out that Captain Wentworth is related to the wife of the person who is now renting her family home. And she lives in like kind of fear that he will see her again because she's so embarrassed of how he treated her. Not how he treated her, sorry. How she treated him. She's embarrassed of the fact that she no longer has like the bloom of youth. I think she's in her late 20s. This was another really big deal for Jane Austen, to be writing about a woman in her late 20s without vilifying her, without making her a fallen woman, a widow, a wife. That was pretty unheard of in her time. Like, women have feelings? What? Crazy. Okay, so she's embarrassed to see him. They get thrown together. Anne is visiting her middle sister, Mary, who married a man who was originally interested in Anne. Anne turned him down mostly because she was still in love with Captain Wentworth. That's like what we are gathering from the book, right? She turns him down because she's in love with Captain Wentworth. He ends up marrying Mary. They get together. They have children. Anne goes to help with the children, so that the people who are renting the house end up with an acquaintance with Mary and her husband, Charles, I think. And, sorry, it's been a while since I've reread it. And also, again, I'm a little bit sick. Fettuccine, say hi. I don't know if she's purring, but don't bite me. I don't like it. Anyways, so they strike up an acquaintanceship. Captain Wentworth shows up. He expresses an interest in Louisa, who is the younger sister of Charles, who is Mary's husband. This is Fettuccine. Hey, baby. Can you come over here? No? Okay. She has a lot of thoughts about Persuasion in Jane Austen, clearly. So, they get thrown together often because because Anne is staying with Mary and Captain Wentworth is courting Mary's husband's younger sister, so her sister-in-law. So she's thrown into his orbit often, and he kind of has these like veiled barbs at her, and we see through Anne's inner dialogue that she just kind of takes it. And again, she's not pretending like it's undeserved. So he keeps giving her these veiled like barbs and kind of mentioning like she didn't trust him, she didn't think he was enough. And we know from her inner dialogue that that was never the issue. The issue was never that Anne didn't think he was enough. The issue was always that she trusted her family. And her family didn't think he was enough because her family is part of the gentry and they are not steeped in reality. I think that's what Jane Austen is really getting at in especially her later novels, especially Emma, which was actually, if you read Emma, maybe we'll do a whole episode on it, but like if you read Emma, it's all about how like the gentry stuck. And so like, and it's dedicated to the Prince Regent. Jane was wild. But like if you read her stuff, it is always about like the importance of living within your means. It's about the importance of staying true to who you are and the importance of morality. We see that in Mansfield Park, where like the root of evil is within Mansfield Park because they make their money from slaves. And so nothing good can happen at Mansfield Park because slavery is the root of evil, and it is the root of Mansfield Park. So like you cannot have a good life maintaining like a life and a income source from slavery. Like it was very much that kind of, not manifesto, but she was commenting on slavery as a practice in the world, and specifically as like it is better to live a smaller life, a less extravagant life, than it is to get money from slavery. That is what Mansfield Park is about. Yes, it's a love story, blah, 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 whatever. But it is about, like, the morality of how you get your money. Emma is about the kind of flippant way that the aristocracy and the gentry, like, meddle in people's lives and they don't even think about it. Sense and Sensibility is very much about, like, when you have fallen, what can you hope for? And in Persuasion, we get this, like, kind of view from the inside of Anne, who has been disillusioned with her family because of what happened with Captain Wentworth. And with how her family lives, she sees how their spending sent them into this really bad situation, and how she had been married to Captain Wentworth, she would have been kind of absolved of it because he like worked for his living and he cared for her and loved her truly, and it wasn't a monetary proposition. This is a whole big thing, but this is why I like live and breathe that like Jane Austen was a radical feminist and no one can convince me otherwise. And more than that, Persuasion continues to be her most personal novel because it was unfinished. She did not have time to take the parts of herself out of that. Now, Jane Austen very famously never married. She died at 41. She was not married. Her siblings married, but she never married. There were like rumors that she was like involved with somebody. They actually turned some of those rumors into an entire thing called Becoming Jane with Anne Hathaway and James McAvoy. It's a wonderful movie, but not necessarily completely steeped in reality. They did find letters between the two, but there was never any kind of firm confirmation that there was an understanding between them. There was never like actual courting going on. And part of that is because the character that James McAvoy plays was a real life guy named like Lafroy, something like that. I don't know. And he needed to marry rich because his family was becoming impoverished because they lived outside of their means. Jane Austen, her family, all of the siblings had to make good matches because they were not the level of gentry where they could sustain themselves just on their land, just on their estate. And so they needed to make advantageous matches, at least a few of them, so that they could carry the other children, especially if the father died. Because some estates in England get passed down only through the male line, and to change that, you have to go through lawyers. It's like a whole thing. If you watch Downton Abbey, they actually do a pretty good historical explanation for this. Up to you if you want to watch that. I can go into it if you really care. But essentially the point is that in Persuasion, I think it mimicked a lot of what she saw in her own family. Not saying that she didn't love her parents. She very much loved her parents. Not saying that she didn't love her siblings. She very much loved her siblings. This was evident in all the letters that they wrote each other and everything like that. But we very much see that she regretted not taking chances when she was younger on love. And I think because Anne is so similar to Jane, we saw her like imagined alternate reality where she did take that chance and she did get love, and the love did come back to her because she said no and they came back anyways because the love was pure and it was strong. And she never got that in real life, and I think that's heartbreaking. But that is one of the reasons that I personally think that Persuasion is one of her most honest and, like, autobiographical novels, because it was unfinished. She didn't have time to take out the pieces of herself. So one of the reasons that Persuasion is one of the books that built me is Jane Austen is one of those people that you read and you either get it or you have to read it again. I think that a lot of women in today's world discount the importance of what Jane did. She figured out... Sorry, I'm, like, sweating. It's part of being sick. Isn't it cute? She, like, figured out how to make an income and take care of her family by her pen, which was not something that was possible. She figured out how to write stories where it was hopeful and still moral. She figured out how to write stories where the women weren't the villains. For the most part, this was something that was really interesting. So, like, during this time, a lot of novels were written by men, or at least pen named by men. And the novel was still, like, a relatively new concept, like, as we understand it today. And men could be rakes that could be reformed. Rake being, like, a bad man who, like, slept around and then gambled and then met the love of his life and was a good man again. He could cause women to fall, but he could also still redeem himself. Who? My thing just glitched. I hope it's still working. Anyways, but he could also still redeem himself, whereas a woman would never be able to redeem herself. When she is fallen, she is fallen. And Jane Austen wrote these characters into her novels in such a way that the women were truly never the villain. There were some women villains in Mansfield Park, but it was pretty much made clear that they were the villain because they were part of the aristocracy, not because they were women. And I think that for me, it was really, like, a formative experience for me as, like, little baby Darren. I'm in high school, I read Pride and Prejudice. I love that very famous 1-star review where it's like, this is just a bunch of people going to each other's houses. Absolutely. But there are so many more layers to it, and it's kind of like putting together the puzzle pieces of history to understand why this was an influential and important book. Why it was important to suddenly, like, what we take for granted now of having all of these, like, rom-coms and books about women's lives and their inner thoughts and seeing women as people. Like, we very much benefit from first wave, second wave feminism. We benefit from education, formal education, and college degrees, and, you know, standardized high school education and things like that, at least in the United States, kind of. I mean, we have a 20% illiteracy rate, but that's a video for another day. And I think we're so far removed from the reality of Jane Austen's world that it was so impressive to step back into her reality and see how far we have come. And little baby Darren didn't totally understand that, but college Darren did, because I took an absolutely fantastic class. It was a Jane Austen colloquium where we read every single Jane Austen book. We watched all of the movies and we talked about them. We talked about their importance in, like, the zeitgeist. We talked about their importance to what became the novel. We talked about how they captured different things that, you know, like Mansfield Park, never directly referencing slavery, but if you know, you know. It was about slavery the whole time. Emma never directly calls the aristocracy stupid, but if you know, you know. She was criticizing it the whole time. The gentry was being criticized actively. Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, like Northanger Abbey, Persuasion. She had a commentary and she was exercising her ability to say something. And that is why Jane Austen is one of the books that built me. She figured out how to say what she needed to say and have her influence, and it paved the way for everything from, like the Brontes and, like Abby Jimenez and Harper Lee and every woman who writes novels and is able to like get their point across. It started with Jane Austen being a stubborn, crazy person and self-publishing her novels when her family did not have the funds, and when it was like looking less and less likely that she would ever see a return on her investment. She did the thing because she had something to say and she wanted to say it and she needed to put it out into the world. And for me, I wish that she had lived longer. I wish that she had lived long enough to see how beloved her stories became. Not just like locally in England, but like just a little bit longer to see that like she could publish under her own name, which I believe Northanger Abbey and Persuasion were both published under her name. The 4 books that came out during her lifetime, not under her name. Just an author. Just the author of Pride and Prejudice. Just the author of Sense and Sensibility. So I wish that she had lived a little bit longer to see how beloved people, like how well people thought of her. Because I think it's important. I think it's important that what she said resonated and mattered and sparked a movement of women having an opinion loudly rather than quietly. And yeah, it took 100 more years for women to get the right to vote, but I think publishing stories where women were thoughtful and we saw the inner working of their minds, where it wasn't just manipulative for a fallen woman or evil. It was calculated. It was full of feeling. It's how we get the lines from the Bronte sisters about, just because I am little and poor and ugly does not mean that I don't have as much feeling as you. It started with Jane Austen being stubborn. Who wouldn't want to take that lesson and hold that with them for the rest of their lives? Be stubborn and be hopeful. Harden yourself to the world, but not so much that you can't be kind. That's what I saw in Anne. She could recognize her family for what they were and still love them. She could recognize that she did wrong to Captain Wentworth and that she should accept that he doesn't love her anymore, even as she loves him so desperately. What is not to love about that message? She should accept that she has to come to grips with who she is and her place in the world and her place in the aristocracy that caused this issue with her and Wentworth. It is one of those novels that truly makes you consider your internal life and what part you take in your external life to make it good or bad. And I think everybody should read Persuasion. I think it is the best entrance into Jane Austen. And I sincerely hope that Paige and her book club love it as much as I do, because I think it is one of her most important works. All of her works are important. There are only 6 of them. They are all important. But for me, Persuasion was the one that just like, it captures your heart and it captures your mind and it just takes hold. It's a story of second chances and accountability and kindness and humility and forgiveness. And I think that that's something everybody in the world could remember more often, possibly, for a lot of reasons. And so that is why Persuasion is one of the books that built me and why I love it so much. And I'm so sorry that this was not as succinct as my other Tamora Pierce ones, because to me, the world of Jane Austen is so expansive and she was so important to me and continues to be so important to me that it is really hard for me to divorce her impact from her life. And for me to talk about what her books mean to me without talking about who she was as a person and what her characters represent from her personhood. In fact, fun fact about the lore of Darren is that when I went to college, I was like really obsessed with the show Bones. And so I really wanted to do psychology so that I could like work in the justice system as like a lawyer or something, and I thought psychology would set me up well for that. And then I got to school and I took an intro to psychology course and I low-key hated it. Brain science is not for me. Love marine biology, Brain science, not so much. But, so I took that course, and then I was also taking, like, you have to take, like, Intro to English, like English 101 or 102 or whatever the hell it was. And we had to write a persuasive essay, and my very first essay in college was about how Jane Austen was a feminist icon. And the professor held me back, Dr. Kennedy, she is fabulous. She held me back afterwards, and she was like, hey, you're an English major. And I was like, no, I'm not. And then a couple weeks later, I was like, I'm an English major. So that is how Jane Austen is one of the authors that built me. And I hope that everybody has a chance to read her and understand that women's stories are important, because that's what she did for the world. She showed that women's stories are important. So this has been We Just Want You to Read. My name is Darren. Tune in next week. I don't know what we're talking about, but tune in next week. And the next time you see me, I will be back to ranting about Tamora Pierce. Probably. Here's another cat. Bye!